If this message found you, it is not by accident. There is a reason you're listening right now, and it has nothing to do with chance. Before you ever had language for your faith, before you understood your calling, before you even knew how to pray the right way, something noticed you. Not people, not institutions, darkness, and it didn't wait for you to become strong or confident. It reacted early. You may not remember the moment clearly, but you felt the resistance, a strange heaviness, a tension that didn't match your age or your situation. You were not looking for trouble, yet it found you. That is often the first sign, not blessing, not recognition. Reaction. Darkness is not intimidated by noise. It is not alarmed by surface level belief or public performance. It does not waste energy on those who pose no long-term threat, but there are some lives it watches quietly. Some people it monitors before they ever step into awareness. And when it senses what God has already seen, it moves early. You might wonder why your path felt obstructed before it even began, why opportunities seemed delayed without explanation, why you felt out of place even in rooms you were supposed to belong in. That was not confusion, that was interference. Not because you were powerful then, but because of what you carry. And here is the unsettling part. You did not provoke it, you did not earn it, you did not choose it. God revealed something about you long before you could understand it yourself. And when heaven reveals, darkness responds. You were marked quietly. Not with fame, not with position, but with awareness, with a depth that made you ask questions other people never stopped to ask, with a sensitivity that made you notice what others ignored. Even as a child, you felt things deeply. You sensed tension in rooms before words were spoken. You could feel when something wasn't right, even when everyone else seemed comfortable. That kind of awareness is dangerous to darkness. Not because it's loud, but because it sees. You may have thought you were just different, or too thoughtful, or overly cautious. Maybe you even wondered if something was wrong with you, why you couldn't move blindly the way others did, why your conscience was so active, why your spirit resisted certain paths even when they looked easy. But that restraint wasn't weakness, it was protection. Before your obedience was visible, your alignment was already known. Before you made public choices, there was a private orientation in your spirit. God saw it, darkness felt it. And that's why the resistance didn't wait. You noticed it in subtle ways, unusual misunderstandings. People projecting onto you things you never said, a sense of being misread even by those close to you. Moments where peace should have come easily, but didn't. Not because you were doing something wrong, but because something was trying to keep you distracted. Darkness does not attack what is useless to the future. It targets what is unresolved but inevitable. There is a reason you were challenged before you were confident. A reason you felt pressure before you felt purpose. A reason you were pushed inward instead of outward. God was shaping something internal while resistance tried to rush you into confusion. You were never meant to arrive unguarded. And notice this, the attacks were rarely dramatic, no grand disasters, no obvious chaos. Just enough noise to make you doubt yourself. Just enough isolation to make you question your place. Just enough delay to make you wonder if you were behind. That's because the goal wasn't destruction. It was distortion. If darkness could get you to misinterpret what you were experiencing, it wouldn't have to stop you. You would stop yourself. You would call preparation failure. You would call discernment fear. You would call waiting being left behind. But God never panicked about your timeline. What you were feeling was not rejection. It was containment. You were being held back from environments that would have misused you before you were ready. And that restraint irritated darkness because it couldn't force you forward or pull you back. You were being preserved in between. This is why you felt watched, not celebrated, pressured, not promoted, aware but not explained. And here is where it gets quiet. Darkness doesn't fear who you are today. It fears who you will become when you finally understand why all of this happened before you even asked for it. You weren't delayed because you were unqualified. You were delayed because revelation requires timing. And if you had stepped into certain spaces too early, you would have been shaped by them instead of shaping them. So the resistance came early, the confusion came early, the isolation came early, not to break you, but because something in you was already known. And that is only the beginning of what was revealed. What you've been carrying has never been obvious to the outside world. There was no announcement, no visible sign that others could point to and say, "That one is different." God did not mark you in ways that attract attention. He marked you in ways that attract pressure. And that pressure didn't come because you were doing something wrong. It came because something was being protected. You learned early how to sit with questions that had no immediate answers. While others moved forward without hesitation, you felt a pause inside, not fear, but restraint. A sense that you were not permitted to rush even when the path looked clear. That restraint often felt frustrating. You may have wondered why progress came slower for you, why certainty felt just out of reach. But what felt like delay was actually discernment forming. God did not rush your clarity because clarity carries responsibility. And responsibility without depth becomes damage. This is where the weight began to show itself. Not as ambition, but as awareness. You noticed patterns others ignored. You sensed consequences before choices were made. You felt internal checks when something looked good on the surface, but felt wrong beneath it. That internal resistance made life harder, not easier. You couldn't just move with the crowd. You couldn't ignore your conscience. You couldn't pretend not to know what you knew. And that knowing came with loneliness. There were seasons where you felt set apart without understanding why. Not wholly isolation, just unexplained distance. Conversations felt shallow. Environments felt loud but empty. Even relationships that looked healthy on paper left you feeling unseen. You weren't asking for perfection, just truth. And truth has a way of narrowing the room. That narrowing wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God was training you to live without constant affirmation, to move without applause, to listen inwardly when external voices offered conflicting directions. Darkness tried to interpret that isolation as rejection, hoping you would abandon your inner compass just to belong somewhere. But the very thing that made you feel alone was what kept you aligned. You also experienced confusion, but not the kind that comes from chaos. It was the confusion of carrying something before you had language for it. You felt called, but not defined, drawn, but not directed. You knew there was more, but you couldn't explain what more meant. That tension was heavy. It made you second-guess yourself. It made you wonder if you were imagining things. But imagination doesn't produce restraint. Conviction does. Darkness attempted to exploit that confusion. Not with obvious temptation, but with subtle wariness, making you tired of waiting, tired of feeling different, tired of holding standards that others dismissed as unnecessary. The goal was to make you lower your guard, to make you exchange depth for relief. But even when you were exhausted, you didn't quit. You slowed down. You questioned, you pulled back. That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom forming under pressure. You may have felt behind in life, as if others passed you while you stood still. Careers advanced. Relationships progressed. Doors opened for others while yours stayed shut. That sense of being late was one of the heaviest weights you carried. But timing in God's economy is not measured by speed. It's measured by readiness. You weren't falling behind. You were being insulated. If certain doors had opened earlier, they would have demanded versions of you that were not yet whole. God was guarding your future obedience by protecting your present stability. And darkness hated that. Because a person who survives confusion without losing integrity becomes dangerous to deception later. There were also moments you felt spiritually tired without knowing why. Not losing faith, just fatigued by the internal effort it took to stay grounded. You carried unseen battles, battles of thought, battles of motive, battles of restraint. You fought to remain honest when shortcuts were available. You chose silence when self-defense would have felt satisfying. Those quiet choices added weight to your spirit. But that weight was not meant to crush you. It was meant to anchor you. God was shaping your inner structure, building capacity to hold truth without becoming arrogant, authority without becoming harsh, discernment without becoming cynical. That kind of formation requires pressure without explanation. It requires seasons where you trust God without understanding Him, and the more you endured without becoming bitter, the clearer it became that your struggle was not random. It was preventative. You were being kept from becoming impressive before becoming rooted, kept from visibility before stability, kept from influence before obedience. Darkness wanted you rushed and exposed. God wanted you grounded and intact. So the delays weren't denial. The confusion wasn't absence. The restraint wasn't fear. It was God protecting what He placed in you. And what you carry is still forming. Darkness is not afraid of how loud a person can speak about God. It is not unsettled by titles, platforms, or visibility. Noise is easy to monitor. Performance is predictable. What truly unsettles darkness is quiet alignment. A life that moves in obedience even when no one is watching. A spirit that listens before acting. A person who does not rush ahead of God or lag behind Him. What terrifies darkness about you is not what you can do, but how you respond. You do not move impulsively. You do not act just because something is available. You pause. You weigh. You discern. That kind of restraint frustrates systems built on pressure and impulse. When obedience becomes your instinct, deception loses leverage. You don't follow God because it feels rewarding. You follow Him because it feels necessary, even when obedience costs you comfort, even when it delays recognition, even when it isolates you from familiar spaces. Darkness cannot manipulate a person who values alignment more than relief. This is where your authority comes from, not from command but from consistency. Not from force, but from faithfulness. You carry a presence that exposes imbalance without confrontation. Lies begin to feel uncomfortable around you. False structures weaken when you are near, not because you attack them, but because you don't agree with them. But that is why resistance followed you early. Darkness sensed that you would not be easily redirected, that you would question what others accepted, that you would obey God even when the instruction was inconvenient or unclear. A person like that cannot be rushed, flattered, or threatened into compromise. You disrupt without trying to disrupt. This does not make you superior. It makes you responsible. God trusts you with weight because you have learned how to carry it without turning it into identity. You don't need to announce what you carry. You don't need to prove anything. Your life itself becomes a quiet witness. Darkness fears this kind of faith because it cannot predict it. It cannot provoke it into reaction. It cannot distract it with noise. It cannot intimidate it with delay. Alignment gives you stability that chaos cannot penetrate. You are not dangerous because you are strong. You are dangerous because you are submitted. Submitted people do not panic when pressure increases. They adjust, they listen, they wait. And waiting is one of the most threatening postures to darkness because it removes urgency from manipulation. Heaven has never been in a hurry with you. Every season has been intentional. Every pause has been purposeful. You were not overlooked. You were being prepared out of sight, strengthened in silence, rooted where applause could not reach. And now something has shifted, not externally, internally. You are no longer confused by the weight you carry. You understand it enough to respect it, enough to protect it, enough to stay grounded. You are not being launched. You are being aligned. Darkness already knows that when your actions and God's will move together, its options narrow. Confusion loses ground. Fear loses influence. Lies lose traction. Not because you confront them, but because you refuse to partner with them. This is why humility remains essential. Ego would disconnect you from the very alignment that gives you authority. God did not choose you to be impressive. He chose you to be obedient, and obedience sustains what charisma cannot. Stay faithful in the unseen. Stay watchful in the quiet. Stay grounded in truth. Do not rush what God is still refining. Heaven does not rush formation. It completes it. Darkness already knows who you are becoming. That is why it reacted early. That is why it applied pressure quietly. That is why it tried to confuse you before you were ready. But you remained. And as long as you remain aligned, there is nothing darkness can do to stop what God has already prepared. Heaven is not rushing you, it is preparing you.